Recent research has shown that 1 in 3 children are victims of sexual violence and physical abuse, and that happens before they reach the age of 18. On the other hand, 12% of the children report neglect, and that report, it reports neglect, and 16% it also reports emotional abuse. This was part of the research that was unpacked at the Mandela Initiative Action Dialogue to combat violence against children, and it was held as part of Child Protection Week. We take this conversation further with Professor Shanaaz Mathews. She's the Director of Children's Institute at the University of Cape Town, and she joins us from our studios in Parliament. Prof, good morning to you, and thank you so much for coming through.
Hi, good morning, Palesa, and good morning to the viewers out there.
Thank you so much indeed. Now, talk to us about the main aim behind this report. I mean, these are shocking statistics.
Well, I think, Palesa, this is the first national prevalence figures we have for violence against children in South Africa. So it's really important information. And it's only once you understand the magnitude of the problem that you're able to design interventions and responses that's appropriate for the size of our problem in South Africa.
Yeah, and this research, like I said, Prof, on my introduction, that it shows that 1 in 3 children are victims of sexual violence and physical abuse before they reach the age of 18. How are these cases reported in different provinces, and what is being done?
The research study that you're talking about was a national study, but it doesn't allow us to really give accurate provincial statistics. But what we do know is that some provinces does have slightly higher rates. So, for instance, KwaZulu-Natal and Mpumalanga would have higher rates of both physical and sexual violence. So it's really important, you know, now that we have an understanding of some of the problems that we're facing, that we also start looking at where the problems are biggest in order to target our services appropriately to reach the children that's most in need.
And with the past weeks, we've seen an increase, Prof, on children being raped and murdered. Can you really say that our children are being under siege, or has it always been the case previously?
Well, I think really importantly we've got to understand that South Africa doesn't have routine data. So we don't have a surveillance system that's able to monitor and track just how many children report abuse firstly, as well as how many children are murdered in the context of fatal child abuse. So we know from the work that I've done on child homicides that we have just under 500 children murdered every year in the context of child abuse and neglect. And this tells us that what we've seen over the past few weeks isn't an unusual event, but rather part of the pattern of violence we're experiencing in South Africa. So the short answer to your question is really, I don't think we've got an increase, but we're actually more aware of what's happening to children.
Yeah, so meaning that the numbers might be higher because some cases go unreported as well.
I agree with you fully. I think, firstly, not all cases gets reported to the police, and we certainly miss a lot of cases where there are fatal child abuse as well. So I can confidently say to you that what we do know is that there is an undercount of the numbers of children that are subjected to violence in the home and violence in communities.
Now, the Interministerial Committee, Prof, through UNICEF, commissioned a study to actually look at the root cause of this abuse on children and the violence, of course. What were their findings?
I was the lead researcher in this commission project, and it's really important that we start looking at what are the pathways for children to either be victims or become perpetrators later on. And what this particular study had shown us that they're really important, that we've got to understand that violence starts in the home and that then transcends into other settings. So very importantly, what this study found was that firstly, family formation. So when a child doesn't live with either or one of its parents, it increases the risk for the child to be exposed to violence. And then secondly, conflict in the house also emerged as a really important factor for increasing children's risks for later violence, as well as perpetration of violence later on. And I think this tells us a lot about where we've got to be putting our efforts to prevent children from being both victims and then later on becoming perpetrators.
But what needs to be done going forward? I mean, talk to us about the program of action and what are the experts saying in terms of trying to break the cycle of violence happening in our country?
I think it's really critical that we've got to have a multi-pronged approach. It cannot just be looking at how we provide services, for instance, in terms of response. I think the meeting very clearly said that South Africa is in a crisis, and being in a crisis means that you've got to look at how you finance and resource your services, as well as what are the most effective interventions to be firstly reducing violence against children, and that therefore it is really critical that we start looking at what are the effective prevention interventions that we have to be implementing at community-based level. Secondly, we've also got to be resourcing our responses more effectively, and therefore, for instance, children should have access to social work services as well as therapeutic services to reduce the long-term impact of abuse if they have experienced it. Yeah. But most importantly, we've also got to start looking at what does prevention mean. Okay. So for this week, we're starting off Child Protection Week yesterday. So Department of Social Development started off their campaign. But we can't have a campaign that lasts for a week. We've got to have efforts that's long-lasting, and it's not just about having a community meeting, but how do we change the social norms in our communities that facilitate and increase the risk of children being abused, not just in their homes, but also in communities.
All right. No, we'll leave it at that for now, Prof. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. There you have it. That is Professor Shanaaz Mathews. She's the Director of Children's Institute at the University of Cape Town, talking to us about this research that shows that 1 in 3 children are the victims of sexual abuse here in South Africa. I mean, this is, of course, as we observe Child Protection Week. Like Leanne said, that is why we're wearing our green ribbons this morning. All right, it's time for your 8 o'clock news.